Hey, it's Ryan Spence from Filogix. Thanks for joining a quick session today. This is going to be a brief discussion about what you can expect to see in Expert come October 11th with respect to finTRAC requirements. So I won't be talking about kind of the general framework of finTRAC. I think everyone's familiar with that. There's lots of resources and courses you can take to understand those things. This is really just talking about, hey, what buttons are going to be new in the system? Where do I click? Where do I find things? So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk through a little bit of Expert so you can see the process that you'd go through and kind of what results you'd expect. So in general, finTRAC is asking for three real big things, right? One is, do I know who my client is? Is the person I'm talking to actually that person? Are they politically exposed, or is there sanctions list that they might be on? I want to see if they're kind of low, medium, high risk and record that somewhere so that at a brokerage level, you can run reports that say, hey, here are all my high risk transactions, or here's potentially a suspicious transaction that I need to act on. So there's lots of stuff that happens in the finTRAC world. And I think over the next, kind of weeks and months, as the industry adapts to it and gets used to it and shares behavior and best practices, you'll see a little bit more clarity. So right now it's a bit uncertain just because you haven't had the practice of doing it. But I think once you've had the practice a little bit, things will become a bit more clear. So I'm going to look at the Expert application from a couple different points of view, right? One is, how do I kind of use the services? Where do I find the buttons? And where do I click on things? And what am I going to see that I should be paying attention to come October 11th and after that? So generally speaking, inside the Expert world, you're kind of used to the screen. And I've got an application that's filled out well, so I'm going to use that so you don't have to watch me type. And because we're working in a demonstration environment today, I'm going to use a couple static images as well to show results rather than having you kind of watch and wait for that result to be generated on the system. So I've got an application I'm working on, and my first thing I'm really thinking about is, hey, how do I get ID validation done and PEP sanctions done through the Expert world? So we have a couple options. If you've seen a couple of our recent webinars, we do have integration with Equifax's AML product called KYC Connect. So this is an option where you can look for that ID validation and PEP and sanctions checking. And you're going to find this inside the credit bureau page. So once you've got a little bit of information about your applicant, you can see I've got Kelly's name here listed, and I'm in the place where I would typically pull a credit report. So it's going to be that familiar screen. You're going to see on the right-hand side now a new option, which is called AML Assist. So this is saying I would like to use the Equifax service to generate and query to look for ID validation and for PEP and sanctions checking. So pick the appropriate check mark. And you'll notice that the authorization method and authorization obtain date fields are now blank, right? You don't edit them. There's nothing you put in here to do an AML assist check. You'll pick Equifax and you'll request, right? Same kind of process you do with a credit bureau request. Now, you can't do a credit bureau request and an AML request at exactly the same time. So you do one and then the other, but ultimately you're going to get a result back at the bottom of the page. Right, you're used to seeing credit bureau history and the credit bureau showing up. Now, below that, you're going to see a new part of the screen, additional reports history, which will show you, and you can then preview the PDF document for the AML assist, that request you've made on ID validation and PEP and sanctions checking. So again, it's a PDF. And you're going to store that wherever your brokerage says you should store compliance documents. It can be on the screen, inside Exchange, somewhere else. Again, you're going to follow that usual process. So now the request is going to go out, and I won't actually click the request button here. I'm just going to show you a bit of a static image so you can see. So as I get the request back, I'm going to come up to the top of the page here, and I'm going to get a couple pages back as a PDF document. So green in this case means good. Right? So if I have successfully validated the ID with Equifax's service, I'll get a green yes in that either AML single source or AML dual source. That's good. So green yes is good. I've validated my client's ID with this Equifax service. Below that, I'll be looking for my PEP and sanctions screening results. Again, green is good. So this no means that I'm not politically exposed or my client isn't politically exposed and there are no sanctions screening. So Equifax has gone out, done the checking they need to do and come back with this report that says, okay, we validated the ID. There's no politically exposed, there's no sanctions. So good stuff. We'll save this document wherever the brokerage says we should, and we'll move on kind of through the rest of the transaction. Now, It's also possible, of course, that Equifax may come back and say, well, we couldn't validate this. Maybe the client is very new to Canada and they don't have enough information in their credit file to generate that single source or dual source result. So again, you're going to get a no. So in this case, red means it didn't work out the way we hoped. So a no means we just couldn't validate it this way. Now, finTRAC, of course, says there's a number of ways to validate this ID. So a no here doesn't really stop anything. It just says this particular way of doing it didn't work out. And think about this as a carpenter might, right? You've got a tool belt, you've got a hammer and a screwdriver and a tape measure and what other things they might have in a carpenter's belt. You just pick the appropriate tool for the job. If one tool doesn't work, then you move on and you look for a different tool. And this is what we think about in the expert world as well. So let's say it didn't work with Equifax. In our identification section of the expert page, we've got a link to Verifast. And Verifast, if I click on that, just opens up their login page, right? So you're taken to a spot that just says, here is Verifast, and you would log into your Verifast account with the Verifast credentials. So this does mean that you'd be signing up and you'd be connected to Verifast. You'd have an account with them, and you would just log in as you need. So if you haven't already done so, it's a good time to investigate that Verifast option as well. But as I move forward, I've done my validation. And again, Verifast, Equifax will produce a result. They'll give you a document which you can store somewhere. Ultimately, you're looking to say, I have done that validation of my client. They are who they say they are. And I've checked that PEP and sanction screening. I've got a yes or no result. Now, I'd expect most people will easily be able to identify who their clients are, and most likely they're not going to be politically exposed or on a sanctions list. So you may find the yes, in this case, more like a needle in a haystack. But again, you're going to use that information to proceed with the rest of the transaction. So as you work through the transactions, you're getting to know the client, you can do some evaluation on their risk level. Now, in the mortgage request details section, we've got a mortgage classification section and a new finTRAC risk level. Now, for those in Ontario, you'll be familiar with mortgage classification. You've been using it for a while. We've added a new box in here called suspicious transaction. And if you do, in fact, have a suspicious transaction, you just check the appropriate box. You get a little message that pops up that says, please notify your brokerage's compliance officer so you can have a discussion about why you've listed this as a suspicious transaction. You validate what it is, and then ultimately, the compliance officer may generate a suspicious transactions report to finTRAC, or just hold on to it for now. Additionally, we've got this finTRAC risk level box. So once you decide what the level of this application is, low, medium, or high, you make the appropriate choice. So we're not going to be prescriptive on how that decision making is done, but whatever method you would happen to use, you pick the appropriate box. Now, before you make a submission to a lender, there's going to be a business rule that will run that will say one of these boxes has to be filled in. So before you can submit, you've got to do this, one of the three. So I would say at this point, once you've done that risk assessment, you make the indication here, just so that when you get to this submission page, you don't see that validation come up. So I've done my ID validation. I've done my PEP sanctions checking. I've got that PDF. I've stored it where I need to. I've done my risk assessment. I've indicated my risk level, and I've indicated a suspicious transaction if appropriate. Now, at a brokerage level, they're often going to be interested to say, well, give me that list, right? I don't want to have to hunt and peck through every file. So fair enough. In the reports section, we have a firm statistics report. And at a brokerage level, you can pick the level you're looking for. You pick your brokerage name, you'll fill out the appropriate date range you're looking for, and you'll run the report. Now, this report takes a little while to generate, so I'm not going to show you the generation of that report. I'm just going to skip right to the end, where at the very end of it, you're going to see a chart that will tell you things like the number of suspicious transactions you have and the dollar value. Much like you'll have the high risk, medium, or low risk units and dollar value. And then kind of lower on, you'll have a list of what those file numbers are. So you can look at the individual file number at any point. So again, that brokerage level reporting, you can look at it any time that just says, what's my percentage of low, medium, and high risk files? So from there, we've really kind of done the work that we need to do, right? We've indicated that we've got a risk assessment. We've indicated if there is a suspicious transaction, and we've gone through the process either with Equifax's KYC or Verifast solution, or an alternate solution you may use. Like finTRAC's got a number of ways to validate ID. You've done the things you need to do. You've stored the documentation that supports this in the place that your brokerage wants to see, and you're ready to go through and then continue with the transaction as you typically would. So that'll end our session for today. If you do have questions, of course, you can reach out to our support team or our account management team, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So from today, thanks very much for listening, and hopefully we'll chat with you soon.